This episode of the Restoration Today podcast is brought to you by JobSite. JobSite is the platform built by contractors for contractors. With JobSite, you'll know exactly where your money is going, keep your team aligned, and finally get control of your jobs all in one program. Stop losing money on projects and start running your business with confidence. Book your demo today at jobsite.com. Hey Restorers, welcome to this episode of the Restoration Today podcast. Today we're talking about something brand new that I have never discussed with anybody on the podcast. I'm very excited about it. We are going to talk about alternative equity and ways to invest in your employees in some interesting ways, incentivize them, stock, those kind of things. So that's what we're going to talk about. I am joined by Chris Buttenham, who is a co-author on a book called Alternative Equity, The Owner's Guide to Phantom Stock and Modern Incentives, which is such a good topic to talk about in the workforce today. So much has changed even just since COVID and the post-COVID world, and how we need to incentivize our people working in construction and restoration. Incentives work a little bit differently, and those high performers especially need different incentives than maybe your traditional, like, oh, well, you get a 401k, you get health care. But there's more. There's got to be more than that, especially for those top performers. So Chris, thank you so much for being here. I am going to toss it over to you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about the book.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me, Michelle.
Yeah.
Introduce myself. My name's Chris Buttenham. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Reins, as well as co-author on alternative equity, our book on modern incentives. And Reins helps small business owners, but particularly in blue collar industries, simplify the process of sharing alternative equity incentives with their key employees, but with the goal of retaining, recruiting the best talent, and really aligning employees with the goals of the business.
Yeah.
And so I come by this honestly. My dad's a contractor, and I worked for him for a number of years after college, and just saw that he lacked the tools and resources to do just that. That I actually was quite familiar with, because in my other life, I had another company, a tech startup, and in the world of venture capital and tech, equity is a very commonplace thing. And these incentives, the incentive structures are completely different. And so I thought, why couldn't, the backbone of America leverage these things that have been proven and well used in other industries, but not in these industries? So that's a little bit about me and why we do what we do.
Perfect. Okay, so talk a little bit about the basics, because we've talked about alternative equity, but we've not put a name to it yet. So what is alternative equity? What are some of these things that you're talking about that maybe construction companies could be doing?
For sure. Yeah. So these things can be esoteric, but they don't need to be, right? So what is traditional equity? Well, traditional equity is like real securities in a business. Like, I'm getting a piece of the company. And often what happens with that type of incentive is it comes with some headaches. So particularly for, the construction industry, who is widely made up of smaller LLC type businesses. This means that you are giving away some level of control
Mhm.
of the business. Not often what you want to do.
Mhm.
It often means that you're opening up the books to the folks that you give this traditional equity to. It's often very expensive, complicated, time consuming to set up. Really, the avenue there is expensive attorneys. That's the only sort of route you can take. Um, and let's see, uh, it often also doesn't align the goals of the business with the financial compensation for employees. And the first thing that happens is it creates this tax bill for employees. So if you give real traditional equity, um, to not to overcomplicate it, but there's intrinsic value in that business, and so the IRS wants their cut, even though there's no cash to pay for
Yeah.
that bill. And so that's not a benefit. That doesn't align employees thinking long term with the business. And so those are some of the reasons that traditional equity has been tricky, particularly for these types of businesses. And so alternative equity is, no surprise, sort of the opposite. So alternative equity is just to kind of define it, is a type of deferred compensation. So they're all what's called non-qualified plans.
Okay.
And it usually comes in the form of phantom stock or profit sharing. And what we've actually done at Reins is we've created our own unique framework for these types of incentives. And that framework is designed to sort of avoid some of those pitfalls of traditional equity. So when you grant some of this alternative equity, there's no tax bill. Tax is deferred. It's designed to be deferred until some future event, typically the sale of the business or a frequent profit share of that business quarterly, annually. Um, Designed to be very simple, cost effective, efficient to set up. The biggest problem with folks in small business owner operators in the construction industry is they just don't have time.
Yeah.
So even if maybe they're really well off, but they just don't have the time to do this, so it's efficient. And more importantly, the issue with traditional equity, like I said, it creates real ownership. Alternative equity gives the benefits of ownership without the traditional drawbacks. So it's not actual securities, it's not actual equity. They get the upside, those employees, but they don't get to look into the books. They don't take on the liability of that business, and they don't have the same owner rights that a traditional equity holder would have.
That makes sense. So define, because I know you're talking about profit sharing. What is ghost stock? Like, what does that actually mean?
I know it's such a bad name, which is why everything is under the things that the incentives that we support is, we call it alternative equity, phantom stock, ghost stock, phantom equity. It is essentially a fancy cash bonus
Okay.
linked to a future triggering event in the business.
Okay.
So I give you 10% of ghost stock, phantom equity. If that business later sells for $1 million, I should receive 10% of the proceeds, so roughly $100,000 in the form of a cash bonus linked to that sale.
So what kind
Now, you can get more complicated with it than
of
that, but
course.
that's sort of like simple terms.
So what kind of triggers do you put on it for a business that maybe isn't ready to sell? It's just a business that's performing really well. What are some of the common triggers like for a construction company for when these incentives might be given out?
Yeah, for sure. So almost always we suggest a good trigger is the sale, because oftentimes people aren't planning to sell and they sell anyways. We talk to a lot of business owners who are surprised at how much their employees value that insurance policy. Thinking of one of my customers, Cooper's Plumbing and Air. He said this explicitly in a video, a testimonial video we did with him, where he was saying he was surprised that there was more than one individual that had brought it to their manager's attention, like, hey, this is so good because I was really worried about what happened if Tony would sell, and he didn't know that. And so it doesn't really cost you anything. One of the common misconceptions that folks have is that that employees have to take this with them. It's one of the benefits of alternative equity, is that you can have the employees forfeit the incentive if they choose to leave. You don't have to, but that's a common feature. So adding that future sale payment trigger is a very popular one. But along the way, it could be anything. It could be a date in the future. It could be some financial goal that the business has. And often what we find is that they'll pair a very simple, you get paid when you sell, sort of phantom stock structure with a more frequent incentive, like a profit share. And the way that works is very much based on the goals of the business. So let's say on a quarterly basis, the most important thing to us is, let's say, our net profit, our bottom line. We'll have some net profit goal. And if and only if we hit that goal, at the end of the quarter, it unlocks a pool of profits that gets shared with the stakeholders in that plan. And so now what you have is a really nice short-term and long-term incentive combination. The long-term incentive is really incentivizing the employees to stick around, and the short-term incentive is really designed to have them focus and align on the business goals.
That makes sense. Okay, this is a random kind of nuanced question, but when it comes to selling, if the incentive is going to be received by the employee upon the sale, can the acquirer ever influence that? Like this is strictly on the seller's side of things, right? Like the buyer can't come in and say, "Well, now I own it. You're not going to get this unless you work for me for another 2 years." Is there any sort of stuff where the buyer can gain control, or is this fully on the seller side?
It's a really good question. So, um, it depends on how it's set up. A lot of the businesses we talk to, they'll come and they'll set a program up 2 to 3 years prior
Mhm.
in anticipation to a sale. Again, assuming that's the sort of the goal that they're moving towards. Um, and so in that instance, there, obviously there's no buyer, so there's no influence. Although they may have a thought, hey, we want to sell to private equity. Private equity is going to think maybe we want some golden handcuffs for these employees. So you can pre-set up, and we actually encourage installment payments through a sale where employment is required maybe 12 to 24 months after in order to receive the fullness of that incentive. But to your point, uh, oftentimes we've seen these incentives come into place at the time of a sale. So we've got an incoming buyer, and maybe it's a discussion. Hey, what incentives are we going to put into place to ensure that the transition maintains in good state, in good status throughout. So there's nothing wrong with that. And then, of course, the buyer with this new asset, they may want to implement a program of their own
Yep.
where they just want to retain the key staff that's obviously gotten the business to the point where it's been, and so there may be a new program put into place post sale too. So at each stage there could be and has been for sure a different type of program put into place.
Perfect. Okay, you gave the plumbing company example, but how have you seen this specifically play out in helping people retain their employees, especially in construction? The turnover can be really high,
Mm-hmm.
especially
Mm-hmm.
depending on the economy and kind of what's going on and what the company down the street is paying their
Yeah.
technicians or PMs or whatever that may be. So, what specific examples do you have of people staying and retaining talent or helping company culture from doing something like this?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think it's all culture, honestly. Like I like to say, it's like incentives aren't a silver bullet, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to pretend that they're going to solve a crappy culture,
No.
right? I think that comes first. And what I've seen with a lot of folks, Cooper's Plumbing is a good example. Wire Nut out of Colorado Springs is another example where they bring this in front of the employees, and it just sort of elevates the culture that they've already created. Oftentimes the owners are sitting behind spreadsheets, kind of not intentionally, but barking like, hey, we need to hit these numbers. We need to, trying to get the team excited about EBITDA. But if you put, if
Yeah.
you put real money behind it and make it real, I think one of the neat things about just a service like Reins is we kind of become this unbiased third party where we make it real. Sometimes incentives are already in place, or maybe there's some handshake agreements, but they're just not real.
Yep.
We actually make that legitimate, communicate it in a way that can be understood and give the owner some backing on the goals that they're trying to hit. Like there's real money behind it. Right now, it's a rising tide lifts all boats
Yep.
situation. So I would say that on the culture side. On the retention side, I think what's cool is equity's not new. So we can look to industries that this has been effective,
Mhm.
with, like tech being one of them, and we just know that it works. It creates sort of more risk taking, more long term thinking, and incentives are designed to elicit a behavioral change, whereas generally bonuses become entitlements. And so I just encourage the thinking between those two things. Like they're designed to actually change behavior, and they're not meant to be taken for granted. And so that is naturally creates a more retention and goal alignment type of outcome.
Did you find any surprises as you were writing this book and doing the research and kind of digging into, especially maybe service companies doing stuff like this?
Yeah, you know what? The biggest surprise, if I'm being honest, and it shouldn't be a surprise because I've been in these shoes myself. This is my second company, and in both of my companies, I've given equity to employees. The surprise is how nerve-wracking of a process this is actually, and how rightfully so, but how scared business owners are to do this. And I think a lot of that is because it's been so archaic. It's been so monolithic and difficult and complicated in the past, which is what, in large part, the inspiration for the book is how can we, in plain English, share best practices and how to do this um, with folks like contractors, folks, business owners in the construction industry. So yeah, I think the biggest surprise is just learning um, how delicate this is, and so you'll see that I think in the book, and you see that in everything that we put forth. We really want to educate folks that here are the tools that you can leverage, free tools to do this to level up your business because really we're trying to support the independent guy. We're trying to support the independent business owner and fight against big business. And we just want to arm them with the tools to do that. So it's all about plain English.
Love it. I love it. I'm all about supporting small companies and independence as well. So, um, I had a question and it just left me. If you were going to have somebody like one key takeaway from the book or from this discussion, like what would you hope that contractors really understand about this?
That that it can be done. I think our biggest challenge is and we appreciate you, Michelle, for having us on because our biggest issue is that people just don't know it exists. I think a lot of folks have thought about giving equity, um, and have thought about doing a profit share, about cutting their employees in, and they just don't know how. And so I think the biggest takeaway is that you can do it, and I encourage folks. We have on our website, I should know this, myreins.com/alternative dash equity. I think you can get a free copy of the book. So like we want to just arm folks with free resources. So it's relatively easy to do and it's safe to do. Like I was saying earlier, I think one of the big things is you can give away a piece of your company and it's a win-win. If employees leave, if you don't reach these certain milestones, then nothing happens, right? I think you can do it in a safe, affordable, and simple way.
So, really quick on that point, have you found any examples where maybe, and I feel like this is probably an unhealthy company, maybe if they're not reaching these goals eventually, but I would think it could kind of work against you at that point. Like if you're making promises and then the company just doesn't get there, or this is a culture thing, I guess, because it could come down to maybe the owner or leadership making some bad decisions or whatever. I think if you're going down this path, you're probably going to make the right decisions to get the company there. But any kind of words of wisdom of to the owners who like promise this but you got to actually get there?
Oh, 100%. So our the by far the biggest gotcha here, in any, I would say any incentive, any bonus structure, actually, you can kind of like say this under the compensation umbrella generally, is that business owners love to overcomplicate this. Um, and I get it, right? They want to, I think that um the desire is to make it such that it's a win-win. Like they don't want it to be, and we don't want it to be an entitlement. They don't want it to be just given. They want it to be earned. And so they will want to bake in all kinds of intricacies. Well, this has to happen, that has to happen, this multiplier, that multiplier. So, everything we do and the book, describes, I think, great examples on how to do this simply is like bare bones. Like I got to understand, um, like your employees, they have all kinds of other things they're thinking about, and they are probably not super dialed into the financials of the business, certainly not as much as you are.
Yep.
Let's focus on one or two things, company goals, personal goals that we can rally around and make a really, really simple formula of how that incentive can be earned. Because if you do, then they can focus on what is that thing that they can drive that ultimately, creates an outcome for your business. And so that's just the number one thing, is just overcomplicating it. And so also, to the point of missing those goals, if you overcomplicate it,
Yeah.
it's gonna make it a lot harder to hit those goals. But you definitely want to. That's what makes the short-term incentives more difficult, is you really want to have a dialed in budget, and and plan for these things accordingly. The profit sharing programs, the right way to do it is just to give the audience a structured piece of info here, is like those plans are supposed to expire annually, so you can integrate the feedback loop of like, how did we do last year? And the more feedback, the better. If we pay out quarterly, then we can actually course correct mid-year if we have to. And that's the right way to think about it.
Perfect. Okay, for people listening, my Reins, REINS, right, .com.
Yes.
For listening, because that's, yes, myreins.com to find out more. The book is called Alternative Equity. Chris, anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
No, just that we're here to help. we like to be value add. Like I said, the biggest challenge is that we want to help the independents, and these folks have historically not had access to this information. It's been protected by private equity and big business for so long, and we want to make sure that it's accessible. So a lot of free resources on our website, including a free copy of the book for a limited time if you want to request it.
Perfect. Well, Chris, thank you so much. This was a great discussion and a lot of new content for me. So thank you very much. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle.
For more Restoration Today and the latest news, visit our website, cnrmagazine.com, and find the latest episodes of the Restoration Today podcast on your favorite podcasting platform.